On December 1, 1948, a dead man washed ashore in Adelaide with a torn scrap of paper in his pocket, and nobody's ever figured out who he was. The body was discovered on Somerton Beach, South Australia. He was well-dressed, impeccably groomed, yet completely unidentified. No wallet, no documents, no answers. For over 70 years, this case has haunted investigators and amateur sleuths alike, spawning theories ranging from espionage to murder to suicide, each one more speculative than the last. But the real mystery wasn't the corpse. It was what he carried. Inside a hidden pocket of his trousers, authorities found a tiny scrap of paper. On it, printed in capital letters, were two words, TAMÁM SHUD. Those words would become the thread that investigators would pull on for decades, leading nowhere and everywhere at once. Everyone thinks this case is solved. They're wrong. What most people don't realize is that the TAMÁM SHUD code was cracked almost immediately, and that solution only deepened the mystery. The words meant finished or the end in Persian. They came from a specific, obscure book, the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a 12th century collection of poetry published in a rare 1920s edition. Police traced that edition. There were only about 200 copies printed. In 1949, they found one in Adelaide, owned by a man who claimed he'd left it on a tram months earlier. When they opened it, the missing page matched perfectly. The book's previous owner, unknown. The chain of custody, broken. The connection to the Somerton Man, still a cipher. Here's where the story fractures. Inside that recovered book, investigators found something else. A handwritten phone number and a name, Jestyn. They tracked her down. She was a young woman living in Adelaide. She admitted she'd owned a copy of the Rubaiyat, but when pressed about the Somerton Man's identity, she refused to speak. She took that answer to her grave. The autopsy revealed a man between 40 and 60 years old, with unusual muscle development and no dental records on file anywhere. His stomach contained undigested food and a rare poison, strychnine, yet there was no evidence of struggle, no suicide note beyond those two words, no clear motive, no suspects, just a body that seemed to materialize from nowhere, consume something toxic, and disappear into history. Theories have multiplied like weeds. Some claim he was a Soviet spy, poisoned during the early Cold War. Others suggest he was a jilted lover who orchestrated his own death. A few researchers have proposed he was a traveling salesman, a transient, even an escaped convict from interstate. None of these theories hold water when examined closely. The evidence, when you actually look at it, is maddeningly sparse. The clothing bore no labels or identifying marks, unusual for the era. The shoes were custom-made but untraceable. His teeth had been recently and carefully maintained by a skilled dentist, yet no dentist in Adelaide recognized his mouth. It's as if someone had methodically erased every thread of identity before placing him on that beach. DNA testing, available since the 1990s, has been complicated by the fact that the body was cremated in 1949, before anyone realized the case would remain open. Any genetic evidence is gone. What we're left with are photographs, autopsy notes, and the persistent ghost of a man who might have been important or might have been nobody at all. The Jestyn connection remains the most tantalizing lead. She was the keeper of knowledge. She recognized something in that book or that name that made her clam up completely. When researchers finally tracked her down decades later, she was elderly and still refused to speak. She died in 1996, taking whatever she knew with her into silence. Some investigators have suggested Jestyn was protecting someone, perhaps a family member involved in a crime, or perhaps the Somerton Man himself. Others believe she was sworn to secrecy by authorities who knew more than they revealed. The Australian government has never fully declassified documents related to the case, which only feeds the speculation. What we know for certain is this: a man died on Somerton Beach in 1948. He carried a message in a foreign language. He was poisoned. Someone knew who he was, and they kept it buried. The TAMÁM SHUD code was solved, but it only led to more questions, which is precisely what makes this case so compelling and so unsettling. Over 70 years later, amateur investigators still comb through archives, chase genealogical leads, and propose new theories. DNA databases have expanded. Cold case units have reopened files, yet the Somerton Man remains a ghost, a perfect cipher of identity, known only by the cryptic words he carried into death. The question that haunts this mystery isn't really who was he, it's who wanted him to disappear, because someone, somewhere, went to extraordinary lengths to ensure that the Somerton Man would remain unknown. And in a case where the evidence has been methodically erased, where witnesses stayed silent, and where government records remain sealed, that deliberate erasure might be the only truth we'll ever have. Subscribe for weekly deep dives into unsolved cases where the official story doesn't add up, because the truth is always stranger than the cover-up.